Hi, everyone. My name is Britta, and I'm the founder of Jasper, a pet loss grief platform that I founded after losing my dog Jasper. And tonight, I am so honored to be joined here by Christiana. She is Jasper's Chief Care and Innovation Officer, but also a leader in pet loss grief support. And something that's really special to me is Christiana was my grief coach in the early days after I lost Jasper. And when I say she changed my life, that is an understatement. She truly helped me navigate what was the most messy, raw, difficult moments of my grief. And I think it's a privilege that we all get to learn from her. And getting her to come to Jasper has been a real full circle moment for me. She gave me the tools, the courage, and the validation that what I was experiencing was normal. And I know you guys will all feel the same. So, professionally, Christiana has over a decade of experience supporting individuals and families through pet loss, anticipatory grief, and bereavement. And something that I know she stands firm on, it's pet loss grief deserves to be heard, it deserves to be supported. It is not less than, it is just as important as other methods of grief. Christiana, thank you for being here. Let's get into it.
Thank you so much.
How did you first get into pet loss grief work?
Yeah, so I had been volunteering for quite a while, but then on like a professional stance, I think it was 2020. A lot of people were making those career shifts that we hear about, and I was one of them. Um, and I decided to join a company that is known for in-home euthanasia. And there was a big emphasis on really being there for people as they are making one of the hardest decisions in their lives. I was the person, I started out just kind of taking those phone calls and walking people through what to expect, being a soundboard, asking questions and not rushing them through it, not treating it like a transactional conversation, but recognizing that it was something that people and we all deserve a little bit of patience and grace with. And eventually from there, I realized that this is something I want to stay on. This is a journey I want to stay with people on, after they lose their loved one. And so that's when I joined the pet loss support team with that company. And there was kind of no going back. It was just a calling.
Was there a specific moment that made you realize this is absolutely what I'm meant to be doing?
Yeah, like I said, it's been a calling through. There's always kind of been that feeling there, that knowing. But I think it felt really concrete when one of my first clients who, was struggling with the loss of her baby, amongst other things, and she was seeking out support for those things as well. But she was having just a really heavy, difficult time going through it. And at some point, I questioned myself. I was like, am I making a difference? Am I helping this person? And I think that it was, eventually she kind of graduated herself. She was like, okay, I don't need to meet as often, but we still kept it consistent. And then when she got to a point that she felt confident enough to move forward and that she wasn't leaving her baby behind and that she could carry this grief with her in a loving, tender way, and allow it to kind of propel her. And she said, hey, I think I'm okay. I'm still, obviously I'm always going to be here, but I've always said my job is to work myself out of the job. And when that finally kind of came full circle and I got to see her arc and her journey with that, I think that was just a realization that like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to do.
I love that. I love the perspective of you working yourself out of a job. Why do you think pet loss grief is so misunderstood, even by people that mean well?
Yeah, and it's one of the categories of disenfranchised loss, which is a loss that like society doesn't really validate or even sometimes acknowledge. And part of that is because the bar is so low for grief etiquette in general. But I also think that it has a lot to do with these personal relationships that we have with our pets and how we express love, in which it doesn't really require language. We don't like find the words. And so when we're trying to talk to somebody else who maybe hasn't been through it, and maybe try to explain to them like why this hurts so bad, it might take a while for us to even find the language, that really explains the depth of the relationship, who was our anchor, who both like felt like an anchor on like rocky waters, but also helped keep us afloat. Like, how do we really explain that? And so I think that there's a lack of like language for it. And so it just makes communication even more difficult.
I completely understand and relate to that. I think even for myself, looking back at my sister lost her cat Siggy before Jasper passed, and reflecting back, even I could admit I probably didn't support her in the way that I know now to support someone. So there's also that little bit of, if you know, you know, if you've been through it, you kind of understand it better. So you're right. Like, and there's no words to put into it. I always knew this would impact me, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around the impact it would have. And I don't think anyone can truly prepare you for that. What keeps you doing this work on the hard days?
Well, first is the reminder that hard doesn't mean bad, doesn't have to mean bad. Hard days are kind of part of the program on this adventure of life that we're on, no matter what, we're going through. And so just remembering that the hard days are kind of necessary to carry and to go through when we are, if we want to get to a point where it feels lighter. Um, So hard doesn't mean bad. And then for myself personally, like when my days are really hard, coming to a space in which I can kind of put my stuff to the side for just a little bit and reach out. It's that human connection. We crave to be seen, and we also crave to like offer that to others. And so I think that it's as profound and important as reaching out for support when we need it, as it is to reach out to support in the ways that we're able to.
Hmm. I like that a lot, that hard does not mean bad. That's, I think, something really important for us all to remember. And the acts of service is huge. I know I've personally got so much out of supporting other people in their grief, and I see it kind of coming up time and time again. How do we deal with nightmares and flashbacks that hit randomly?
Yeah, and they do. And that's really normal, especially in the beginning. We tend to replay. It's our brain doing its job. Just because it's normal doesn't make it easy. As far as, the nightmares, dreams are kind of like in this a little bit of unknown realm in psychology and neurology, but one of the theories is that dreams and nightmares are how we process the really hard and intense emotions that either we are not able to do during the day, or we're trying to figure out how to, go about life. So dreaming is a safe place that our brain can process those hard things. So when we wake up, even though our brain can kind of recognize, like, okay, that was a dream, our body doesn't. Our body is still feeling in that fight or flight, or in that memory. Our nervous system kind of needs to recalibrate. So even though it might be hard at 2 a.m., getting ourselves up and out of bed, even just for, 5 minutes, it doesn't have to be a whole big thing, but splashing some water on your face, drinking some cold water, reading a book for 5 minutes, but something to help remind us and ground us that our nervous system can understand, like, okay, that was a dream. We are here. We're safe. We're safe right now. And that can just help us go back to sleep, or at least go back to rest without jumping right back into, where our body was when we were having that nightmare.
So, what exactly is happening in the brain and body when this shows up?
So with nightmares, again, it's one of those things that we're not 100% sure, but that's one of the theories of processing. But the flashbacks is what our brain is doing. Like, our brain has kind of two main functions for memory that work in tangent. And one of them is almost like a camera that's like, taking in our environment, taking in things. And then the other part is where we store those photos. And we can go back to that photo book and, pull those memories out. But when we're going through something, we experience something that feels traumatic, and it doesn't mean that we can feel that it's traumatic even if we had this, beautiful goodbye. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but like our body feels a threat, an emotional threat, and it acts in the same way as if there's a physical threat. And so when that happens, that camera is going off like 10 times as fast. It's taking everything in so that it can collect this information so we can know what to do if this happens again. Um, and so it doesn't really have a place to store all of those photos, that our memory is kind of taken. So what's happening is that we're a lot not processing necessarily because we avoid it. Flashback comes up, we try to distract. Um, and so those photos, so to speak, keep popping up because they want to be processed and they want to be stored. That's kind of how we're able to kind of work through it. But that is why they continuously pop up.
Do you recommend retelling the full story about what happened, or does that kind of reinforce everything?
So that's a yes and a no. Um, I do think it's important to tell our story in full, like give it another place to live outside of our bodies. Um, but a lot of the research has kind of like showed us that retelling our story over and over again, or at least that part that feels traumatic, um, can actually re-traumatize us. So it's one thing to like tell the story and process it, especially if we have like a professional, to do that with us. But retelling the traumatic parts of our story over and over again is not really something that is recommended anymore because that kind of keeps us in that trauma state.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think I can almost like kind of like pull on experiences of myself where it's like retelling something like doesn't make me feel better. It's you think saying it out loud over and over again might, but it almost kind of re-brings back all those memories.
Yeah, and I think that we can, it doesn't mean that we should never tell our story, but we can kind of ask ourselves, what parts of the story do I want to share right now?
Right.
And
Right.
that's fair.
Okay. Another big question and thing that comes up with almost everyone I've met, but I know something I've deeply experienced myself. The guilt, the what ifs. How do we get out of the what if loop, especially when we're in one of those guilt spirals?
Yeah. So that what if loop is us trying to find a sense of control, is trying to like change the narrative. Um, and that's not possible at this point, but it's easier to feel guilty than it is to feel helpless, right? Um, so I think that one of the biggest, like, it's two words that we can kind of balance that what if it, which is even if. So when the loop keeps coming of, what if I would have waited an extra day? What if I would have done this differently? And then coming back to answering it with even if I would have waited an extra day, an extra week, even if I would have, taken him to the vet rather than, do it at home, whatever the what ifs are, balancing out with an even if. Even if I would have done that, would I be grieving any less? No. Even if I would have done that, he was at the end of his life. Even if I got 6 more days, weeks, months, years, my heart would still be broken whenever I lost him. And that is because there's so much love there. So just balancing out with that even if can just kind of support us through the loop.
Okay, that's very helpful. How do we avoid toxic positivity? Because I think that's Both internal and external. And when I say that, I mean, like, I know when I had been spiraling and shared it with family or friends, they would try to throw everything at me that I did right, that I was an amazing mom and did all these things, and Jasper had a great life and you had this many years. Like, think about that, Britta, think about that. And I think sometimes, even for ourselves, like, we try to almost reframe to the extreme, the toxic positive, but that doesn't help. So what's another reframe that doesn't feel like that toxic
Yeah.
positivity?
Well, I think that like recognizing that positivity in and of itself is not toxic, but there is a category of positivity of that is toxic, that feels toxic. And I think that to positivity can feel toxic when there's like erasure there. When we get the pep talk without any acknowledgement of like what we're actually going through and how hard it is. So kind of choosing to like be okay and accept that there's this feeling here and I'm still really angry, right? And so I believe that Grant is one of our grief coaches, and well, I know that he's one of our grief coaches, but I believe that he is like he kind of specializes in acceptance and commitment therapy. And a big part of that is like allowing those difficult emotions to exist and also knowing that we can say, okay, we can let them exist and they don't necessarily have to be in the driver's seat and control what we're doing. Um, so I think including and in a lot of those, kind of sentences or like the things that come up, because we kind of want to dig our heels in of like when somebody tries to push that positivity on us, we want to dig our heels in back and explain to them how hard this is, how much this hurts. And I think that instead of saying, yes, I'm so grateful for him, but I'm angry, we can replace the but with and let both exist at the same time. Yes, I had all these years with him and I'm still angry.
I love that. Yeah. I think something I've been trying to channel, grief and love can coexist. And now that I have a new puppy, Theo, that's joined my family, it doesn't erase that I'm grieving Jasper. I can, two truths can be true at the same time. I can still be grieving deeply while also finding a lot of joy and brightness in this new relationship I have. It's such a good reminder that just replacing that word and is so
Yeah.
good.
I always say, like, if you're not comfortable with paradoxes and ambiguity, I'm so sorry, but that's where grief lives. And so that like dialectical behavioral therapy is really big on using that and as
Mhm.
well, so I think there's different modalities we can kind of pull from, and just like keeping what resonates and leaving what doesn't.
And if someone keeps replaying the final days or the euthanasia decision, like what's most helpful there?
Yeah, I think that replaying those final days is again, it's like our that part of our memory, that kind of took all those photos that we're trying to process. But one tool that I'll mention now, I can list out a few, but is kind of a way of like pulling from our memory that's not necessarily just like autopilot pulling out a memory of their life. Because we want to remember their life is not defined by their death. But instead of just saying, hey, what's a memory from their life, getting us to really think deeply about who they were, their personality. So, one exercise that I like to practice with people is, imagine that your loved one, your pet, your fur baby is in the passenger seat on a road trip and they're in charge of the radio. What kind of music would they be putting on? What would they know all the words to? What songs would they be like, ugh, no way? And like kind of give yourself that opportunity to think of their personality. I always say like this one would be really into like 2010s like rap and hip hop music, because he's really kind of cocky and confident. And this one would probably listen to a lot of like Evanescence, and kind of like that emotional rock music. And it just like helps remind me of, more than just pulling out memories, but pulling out that feeling of who they are.
You're so right. I remember when we first started working together, you had asked me, tell me about Jasper. And I was like trying to think of a big moment, a big adventure we went on, or this big thing. And you were like, just a random moment or a random piece of her personality. And you're right. Like, yes, there are these great moments, like a wonderful hike or a trip to the beach or a road trip or these other things, but it's their personality that makes the most sense. Like, my favorite photos of Jasper, yes, they were at like cool places, but it was really about the joy that I kind of feel coming out of the photo of him, or the joy I am reminded of that he had when I look at that picture. I love that. It's more about that personality, that bond, and Jasper would probably like classic rock like his mom, but also because he was such an old soul. Um, but such a good way to kind of reframe, but also just remind us of them as a whole, not these individual moments.
Right.
So we have one more community member question, then we'll go into a lightning round. But something I know I've personally dealt with, but as we know, and we talked about before, acts of service, helping others with, while you're navigating grief can be quite healing. I know I've experienced that. I mean, I created a community and I've gotten so much out of helping and supporting other people. But sometimes when we're grieving, hearing other people's stories or challenges can also feel draining or weigh heavy on us. What do you suggest in moments like that?
Yeah, it definitely can. And I think that as a grief professional, I'm, people always say, like, how do you do this all day? And part of that is that I'm kind of lucky because, like, I have some structured boundaries. Um, and it can be hard to do that when we're just kind of like, putting our heart out there for somebody else, opening up our heart to those who, we know what they're going through. Um, but I also think that, like, part of like how I'm able to do what I do is a mantra and just like a worldview in this idea that there is a trust that I'm a companion on somebody else's journey. If I'm helping somebody through grief or anything else that they're going through, I'm a trusted companion. This is their journey. And I believe so much in the power of like our resilience and like how profound that can be, that I trust that they're going to figure out where they need to be in this journey. I can come visit, I can be a guest, we can talk about where we want to go while I'm here for this short time. But I also have to come away and recognize and trust that they will figure out where they need to go on this journey that they're on. And so that's kind of a mantra to keep when we need to take a step back, check in with ourselves and say, okay, I'm feeling kind of heavy. I don't know if I have more to give. And we do what we can. And then we also trust that if we need to take a step back, that's you on your journey. And you can just recognize and trust that somebody else and believe in them. Not just like you don't have to just let it go, but it can help to say, I believe in them and I know it's going to be hard. We don't have to take away from that. Again, we don't have to do the toxic positivity, but to just remind yourself, that you're figuring it out on your journey and sometimes they intersect and that's beautiful. And if you need to take a step back, like have a place of trust in your heart that, they will figure out where they need to be on their grief journey, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And it reminds me when we worked together one-on-one, even, I remember I joined one of our calls and it was the first time in months since Jasper left that I was doing okay. I was having an okay day. And it always stuck with me that you said to me, you said, let's hang up, call me when you need me, but ride the wave. It might not last forever. It might not last that long, but sometimes you need to kind of just listen to yourself and check in and say, hey, maybe it's okay to stay in this like okay, neutral state. And that really stuck with me. And a year later, this past June, I remember personally, I was kind of experiencing a moment where I was like, I think I need to take a step back from support groups. And I did. And I felt empowered because I remember you reminded me that, but also, like you just said, I knew everyone was in good hands. Um, I knew everyone had the opportunity to navigate and get support from other people, other grief coaches, other community members. And you're right, it's sometimes we need to kind of take a step back and protect ourselves in a sense. And it's okay
Yeah.
to take breaks. It's okay to take those pauses. It doesn't mean you can't come back. Um, Such a good reminder.
Yeah, and I even argue that it's necessary
Mm,
sometimes, like checking in with yourself after a group, checking in like, do you feel lighter? Do you feel
mm.
heavier? Right. And like that can kind of help us remember that our grief evolves and our needs are going to evolve through that grief as well. So sometimes what was really, really helpful in the beginning might not be exactly like if we're checking with our grief what it needs in this moment. So we can kind of take a step back and reassess. Sometimes our grief needs a little bit of levity.
Yeah, such an important reminder. It does. I've experienced it and it's so, so true. So a couple lightning round questions before we close out. Go-to grounding tool when grief hits you out of nowhere.
My go-to grounding tool is called object narration. And it is like picking an object, any object, let's say, my water bottle or water cup, and kind of like describing it ad nauseum, in all the different ways you can. Like it's matte, it's kind of like forest greenish. There's like a metal straw is clanking in it, has chapstick around it. It tapers a little bit. Like again, you really can surprise yourself of how much you can describe something that's like just so mundane. But what that can do is it brings our focus to something that's in the here and now. So when we're having like really bad anxiety, we're future tripping, or we're like wanting to emotionally dissociate, it just brings us back into this moment without the pressure of anything. We could just look at something and just describe all the things that we can.
Okay, and that works anywhere, grocery store, work, school, home.
Yeah, if there's objects around you, then
Okay,
it works anywhere. Yeah.
okay, love that. Most common mistake people make when trying to move on.
Probably thinking that moving on is a thing.
Hmm,
um, we move forward. We don't jump from, devastating sadness or grief to, I'm okay now. I've moved on. It's this, kind of accepting and choosing to move forward and move with, and it's going to look different. Sadness and joy are going to intermingle a little bit at first, and grief is yours to keep. And I wouldn't try to take it from you, right? Because it's something that we can move with and carry with tenderly.
okay. How do you handle family and friends who just don't get it?
With care. Definitely with care. I think that there are a lot of people who, as we talked about in the very beginning, just don't get it, good or bad intentions aside. And I think that like it's really important that we learn who our people are and who to go to. There's different people I go to when I need a shoulder to cry on than when I need a ride from the airport or like career advice, things like that. So know who your people are, and that may take a little while. There may be grief there when you think that somebody is that person and they're not equipped, to handle that. Um, and so, there are people who we can use shorthands with that have been through it. All we have to say is, it's been 6 months today. Say no more. They get it. And then there are people who they're not going to get it, and that's okay. And it's okay to kind of decide like they don't get access to your broken heart. We get to decide that. Doesn't mean we cut them off, but they don't get access. And then there's the people kind of in the middle that I don't think get enough love. Um, because there are people who maybe don't get it and they know they don't get it and they still want to be there for you, right? And with them, a lot of times it's communicating our needs as we figure them out. It's saying, I know that you're trying to help when you say that. I really just like want to share this picture with you,
Yeah.
or I really want you to just say, I'm sorry, that sucks. And so I think that that's kind of like figuring it out and figuring out how to communicate with them.
Makes so much sense. And yeah, you're right. Like different people fulfill even just a basic friendship, fulfill different things. You have the friend you go to museums with, the friend you rot on the couch with, and so it makes sense that you rely on friends and family for different emotional and grief support needs too. Instead of getting upset with someone that doesn't get it, maybe they're just not the person you rely on for that kind of connection. And why it is important to find your community that does get it.
Absolutely.
Last question. What does healing in pet loss grief realistically look like?
Healing realistically is quiet. I think that's the thing. Is like from the outside, it's very quiet. But I think what it is again like carrying that grief with and allowing grief to eventually be this companion. It's not going anywhere. And sometimes it's a companion on our journey that we can look to for guidance of how do we want to handle a situation. And maybe this time when we're upset at somebody, we're still going to say, I love you before we hang up. It's that little choice right there. It's, just kind of like taking stock in our values and taking agency in how the kind of person that we want to be after what we've been through.
I love that. I think something I keep thinking about since Jasper passed is who do I want to be? What is my purpose? What you can let this loss destroy you, or I try to channel him and live more like him. I'm trying to be more present and find joy in the really small, insignificant things. And it's nice to hear that that's what healing is. That's what navigating this is.
Yeah.
Christiana, thank you so much for doing this Q&A with me, for being a part of Jasper, for helping me throughout all of my grief. I cannot thank you enough. I feel so privileged and honored to have gotten to work with you then and now, and I'm so excited for the community to get to learn from you directly.
Thank you. And I'll always be grateful for Jasper, because Jasper is what connected us the first time and the second time, and it was what really was the catalyst to this community. So I am honored to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that has been here watching. I'm so excited to have more conversations with you, Christiana, and our other coaches and other people out there, but it's been an honor. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and deep expertise, and we will see everyone again soon.
All right. Bye, guys. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.